today. I will say thank you. And we are looking forward to learning together. So I'd like just to give, because we are very few, we are still expecting others to join us. What I would like to inform the participant is that please just indicate your country next to your name. It will be great to know who is in the house. So kindly, just next to your name, there are 3 dots somewhere next to your name. When you click, it will give you more, then you'll be able to put your country, and we'll appreciate that. So I'll give this opportunity for us to be able to introduce ourselves. And thank you, Olive. I can already see Kenya. You've already indicated. So I'll give opportunity for us to be able to introduce ourselves. And allow me to start with Joy, if you do not mind. Joy is our senior education officer from IDRC, and she's responsible for the hub. She's worked with us through this journey since 2020 to date, and we really appreciate you. And she's here with us today just to work with us one more time, and hopefully also in the future. And let's just hear from Joy. Just introductions for now. I'm sure we are to hear from you later on again.
Thank you, Yvonne. It's a pleasure being here. I think I've met most of the participants online. I also see there's Afghan attending. Good to see everyone. So as Yvonne says, and as it shows on my screen next to my name is Joy Nafungo. I work for IDRC in the GPE Kicks program as Senior Program Officer based here in Nairobi, Kenya. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joy. So I think I'll go to the Kicks team, and then I will go to the countries. Sorry, after the Kicks team, I'll go to our facilitator for today, and then I'll go to the countries. So allow me to welcome Zamzam. As we may be aware, all of us, or some of us, Kicks is made up of 3 consortium partners. UNESCO ICBA is the lead partner. We also have Africa Union as our partner, and we have UNICEF SRO as our partner. So we have Zamzam representing UNICEF SRO. She's here with us today. Zamzam, kindly go ahead.
Sure, thank you, Yvonne. Good afternoon, everyone. As Yvonne said, I'm Zamzam Daib. So I work for Kicks Hub from the UNICEF side. So basically project coordinating from UNICEF side, and happy to see you all here.
Thank you so much, Zamzam, and welcome. Gabriel?
Thanks, Yvonne. So I'm Gabriel, and I support knowledge management and communications. I'm based at UNESCO ICBA, and it's wonderful to be here with everyone.
Thank you, Gabriel. And my name is Yvonne Boya. I work for UNESCO ICBA in the Kicks project as the research consultant. So I'm also going to invite Dr. Kilemi. Just say hello.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. And the team, Gabriel, Samsam, and Joy, and the country representatives. My name is Kilemi Mwiria. I'm part of this project. I'll be going through along with you. I'm particularly interested in this because other than being an academic, I've also been involved in policy making in government. So this is quite an interesting opportunity to interact with policy makers and implementers, as well as the Kicks team. Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you so much. So I'll just quickly give you a second or two just to introduce yourself and your country. Kindly, it's good to know who is in the house. So we'll start with Adam. Adam from Somalia.
Thank you very much. My name is Adam Mohammed, the coordinator of Education for All Somalia Coalition, EFOSOM, working with GBE and Oxfam in Education Outloud Program in Somalia for the next 2 years. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's good to see you once again. Can we hear from Albert Ngimba?
Thank you. How are you, Mr. Moya? I'm Mr. Albert Ngimba, speaking from Tanzania, Dodoma, Minister of Education, Science, and Technology. I'm an education officer, higher education department. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Albert, and you're welcome. Ami.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Barnicott. I'm the CEO for a partner in education based here in Rwanda. APIE are just doing an innovative pedagogies project. We've just started with the Education Commission as their Rwanda country partner, also working with Kenya and Ghana. So really interested to hear more from today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. You're welcome. Jerry?
Hi, my name's Dani. I also work for APIE and I'm sitting on the call for the same reasons. The same as, yeah, I work with Amy.
Thank you so much, Jerry. We have Demalesh. Please forgive me if I don't pronounce your name correctly. It's
You're right, thank you. My name is Demalash from Ethiopia, UNICEF Hawassa Field Office, working for us an education specialist. Thank you.
Thank you, Demalash. Dr. Fabian?
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Fabian Habimana from the Ministry of Education. I'm in charge of science, technology, innovation, and research in the Ministry of Education of Rwanda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fabian. Welcome. We have someone from Early Childhood Network. I'm not sure who is in the house.
Good afternoon. My name is Judith from ECD Network for Kenya. I'm the communications officer. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Welcome, Judith. Lola from Zambia, kindly go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Lola Kaniki. I'm Senior Education Officer, Teacher Education and Specialized Services, Ministry of Education, Zambia.
Thank you, Lola. Mamosa from Lesotho.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
This is Mamusa Masia at the Ministry of Education and Training in Lesotho. I'm the Senior Database Administrator of the ministry.
Thank you, Mamusa. We have Margaret Akinware.
Hello, my name is Margaret Akinware. I'm a former UN International Profession Officer on Education. I'm currently a board member of the Foundation for the Promotion of Childhood Care and Development in Nigeria. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much, and you're welcome. Miriam. Miriam.
Yes, good afternoon. Miriam Matikane from South Africa. I'm a provincial education department responsible for research, planning and monitoring and evaluation. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam. You're welcome. We have Mohammed and then Olive. Mohammed Hassan.
Yes, thank you very much. It is Muhammad Hassan from Somalia, Director of Curriculum, and I'm interested in this research and glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Olive Budia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Olive Budia, formerly working with Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, one of the architects of CBC, now freelancing as a consultant. Thank you.
Thank you, Olive. We have Sekelekele from Lesotho. Okay. Okay, Rose. Sorry, Sekelekele, please go ahead. We cannot hear you. I don't know if you are muted. Okay, Rose, kindly go ahead. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know whether the other participants are not able to hear me, but please introduce yourself in the chat. We'll really appreciate that. So I would like to take you through the agenda for today. Gabriel, if you are in a position to project, please, the agenda.
Yes, just one moment.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. So this is the agenda for today. Having introductions. After that will be the officer from UNESCO, Dr. Victoria Kisache, is the focal point from UNESCO. Unfortunately, she's not able to join us today because we also do have guests from our UNESCO headquarters visiting Addis office. So she'll not be in today, but we'll also have remarks from Joy. Like I said, she's the senior education officer from IDRC. And she'll be giving us a few remarks on behalf of GPE and IDRC. Then we will have presentations from Dr. Kilemi. We'll also have plenary discussions about the presentations, and we'll have a case study. It's always good to have case studies to learn from. And then we'll have also an opportunity to give comments about the case studies and what we can learn from the case studies and how we can apply it if there are some learnings that can apply in our own context. And then we'll also have a plenary session for us to be able to share views on how best to strengthen the role of data, evidence in policymaking, which is the main reason why we're here. So that is our agenda for today. Thank you so much, Gabriel. So allow me, first of all, to give this opportunity to join Afungo of IDRC to give us her remarks before we welcome the guest speaker for today. Thank you. You are welcome, Joy.
Thank you, Yvonne. Like I said earlier, it's really a pleasure to be here and to be participating in these webinars that you have been conducting with countries, and again also to appreciate the attendance of the countries present, but also the education stakeholders present. So I'm here on behalf of the GPE KICS program. Like I mentioned, I work at IDRC, and our role is to support the granting of the GPE KICS program, of course, in partnership with several other education key stakeholders across the globe. So, of course, the topic of employing evidence in research is a very, very important topic, very useful and relevant to our context particularly. And I was really happy to note that the decision by the Africa 19 Hub to conduct this particular webinar was as a result of the demand from the focal points and participants in the hub, the need to understand more about how evidence and research can be used for policymaking. So I really acknowledge that we are not just sharing knowledge about what successes across countries, but also we want to learn more on how we can continue using this knowledge that we're learning and evidence and successes and best practices in improving our policies. Of course, I think the big question here will be how can we strengthen the use of evidence within our context, but also acknowledging what is possible and really what is not practical. And also acknowledging that this is a process. No one has figured it out yet. I think it's part of research, in fact. Analyzing the role of evidence in itself, in education in itself, is still an evolving research area. And I'm glad that we are learning together. Hopefully that we generate some knowledge, we exchange some knowledge so that we get to understand better. Again, also, when I looked at the agenda and the concept note, I also note that there'll be an opportunity to discuss some challenges, what you're facing, what can be done, some opportunities in terms of who actually is mandated within the Ministries of Education to be in charge of strengthening use of this knowledge, and also how can you ensure buy-in of these relevant authorities. And again, also the challenge of evidence use is not a challenge that we experience in these parts of the world only. I think it's a global issue. We do have evidence available, particularly across some thematic areas. And of course, there's a challenge of use. How do you make use of it? But not to say that we have adequate evidence available. I think that we also have the challenge of lack of evidence in some cases. That's why we continue conducting research. And also, I see that at some point, it will be a discussion on approaches on how evidence use can be strengthened, maybe sharing some case studies or some successes from the context. And I hope that we get to learn from that as well. Also recognizing that we have different types of evidence, and then also we have different structures of generating and using evidence. So what might work in your context might not necessarily work in another country. For example, what works in another country may not really work in your context, but then the idea here is to share knowledge and ideas and see how you can even adapt some of these lessons. Again, also, this is a knowledge sharing forum. It's also some form of capacity building. Maybe we get a point to even reflect on our work, what we are doing within our spaces, and how we can continue strengthening the innovations that we're working in the countries, or our roles and responsibilities in the respective ministries of education and beyond. So that's it for me. I hope I'm going to be participating in all the 3 sessions, and I'm looking forward to learning as well, to getting to understand what is happening in the different contexts, and hopefully that by the end of it all, we'll have better idea of how we can do this. All the best, Yvonne, and everyone present. And thank you. Back to Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Joy. It's always a pleasure to have you here and for your support. And colleagues, just to echo what Joy has said, basically Africa 19, we focus on promoting policies through evidence that exist. So we're looking at evidence-based policy changes, and that is our major theme that we want to promote. And so maybe just to give a background of how we ended up with this particular workshop, we have had several assessments undertaken. We had assessments in 2020 and in 2021. So we had a rapid assessment in 2020, October 2020. We also had a baseline assessment in 2021, and we had a pulse survey in 2022. And in all these assessments, what came out strongly is that we do have evidence that exists, but what is needed is the use of this evidence, and hence the need for this particular workshop. For instance, if I take the pulse survey that we undertook in February this year, of which 17 countries out of the 18 participated, 90% registered a need to be trained on how to use evidence for decision making. So we are hoping that this will be beneficial to all of us, and that we'll be able to use the knowledge back in our own countries. So I would like to invite our speaker of the day, and Gabriel, kindly just give me the bio for proper introduction.
Do you still have Gabriel on?
Yes, just sorry,
Yes.
one moment.
Thank you, Gabriel. I think it's important for us to be able to know who we are going to learn from. So our facilitator will be Dr. Kilemi Mwiria, and Kilemi is an education consultant. He served as a Kenyan Assistant Minister for Education of Higher Education and Science and Technology from 2003 to 2013. And during that period, he was also an elected member of parliament. He has worked as an education consultant and as an academic at Kenyatta University and the University of Witwatersrand. He's also consulted widely for governments, including some of our governments within Africa 19 Hub, and is also a local and international, and also for local and international donors. So this is someone who has been on the seat of policy making. He understands how research can contribute to policy making. So please allow me to welcome Dr. Kilemi. Dr. Kilemi, please, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. Gabriel, I hope you are able to share my first presentation. I'd like to take this opportunity also to appreciate this very rare moment to be able to share my views or my experience on the role of research in policy planning. I always say I've gone through the full cycle, from an academic to a consultant to a policymaker and to a politician. So this is extremely interesting for me, but not just interesting, but I also appreciate how important this kind of project is for the African continent, given the importance that government places on education, and given the many decisions that have to be made. If we can have research influencing what happens, then we are likely to make better decisions. And it is good. You know, we have here a very mixed team comprising of representatives of donor organizations that are putting money in education, people in government who implement, who design and implement policies, and other stakeholders in the NGO and consulting world. So I am looking forward to an extremely lively session, but more importantly, a great output out of this, especially because the plan eventually, as I understand from Yvonne, is that after understanding what role research can play, we have an opportunity also to do a research project identified by the participating countries a particular project that will influence policy that is very important for, or considered a priority for the country. So let me go straight to the presentation. It is that's the title: Employing Research for Policies and Practices. And the objectives have been stated is to help countries to understand the importance of research in policy making, to provide an opportunity for countries to learn from experiences, challenges, and good practices on using evidence for policy discussions and policy improvements, and finally, to guide country participants in analyzing national level good practices, challenges, relevant existing evidence in the 6 thematic areas that, that KIXGP are in. If we could, yeah. Gabriel, next slide, please. So there are basically there are 3 important aspects of this program. First is the point about research and policy. Why is research and data evidence important for policy making? We need to be able to answer those questions through the next 3 workshops. The second question that we need to answer is what existing evidence can we use for research findings to support policy? And finally, the question of what are the best ways to strengthen the role of research in policy making? Because if we understand the challenges, then we're in better place to be able to say, how is it that we can overcome those challenges to ensure that what research that is done actually impacts on policy, other than just being theoretical pieces that are published in journals that most of us will not read. Next. So again, the 3 questions also relate to the previous ones. How can research be used to support policy formulation? Why is it not always possible for research to impact policy? We are familiar with this in the continent, that there's a lot of research, but it's not clear that that research influences policy. So why is that the reason? That's one question we need to answer. And the final question that we need to address is, what should be done to enhance the use of data and evidence for policy formulation? It's no need to be part of this to just ask questions and talk about problems without asking questions about how we can do better than we have done. So a second part of my proposal is to ask questions on why is it that evidence is needed for education decision making. This is the reason. Education is the most important sector in most of our countries, in all our countries, I would say, both in terms of its development, it's the way it's perceived in development, but also in terms of the money that governments allocate to education. In most of the 19 countries that are participating in this exercise, more than 1/3, more than 2/3 of the budget goes to education. But in spite of this importance that is placed on education and the money that we put in it, a lot of education decisions are made without taking account of adequate knowledge and information on the many alternative decisions that can be made more cost effectively and that can have a greater impact. Secondly, many decisions are being made without appreciating the interconnectedness or the wider context, and the many factors that affect education outcomes. So sometimes we look at just one factor rather than look at it holistically. Thirdly, a lot of education decisions are made without reference to even the data that is already existing, and data that may be even cheaper and for effective alternatives. So essentially is that the point is education is important, very important, as evidenced by how much money is put in it, but a lot of the decisions that are made on what kind of policies to put in place and to implement are not guided and do not benefit from research findings. Thank you, Gabriel. So just by way of examples, very quickly, where is evidence for planning and policy making useful? And there are 4 levels. One is the level of national government. The second level is at regional government, regional or district government. Then at the school, where we begin with where there is a principal and the teachers. Now, at the national level, this is the most important, and this is what is important for most of us who are sitting here today, because it's about policy at that level. First, national governments will require research to assist in the monitoring of overall national, regional, and district achievements and attainment levels. Government will also require research to support the monitoring and reporting of measures of school performance. Also important for research, how research can help is in measuring of teacher effectiveness, as well as other workers. Research can also support us in monitoring production of human capital. Are we generating the capital that we need to serve both the public and private sector? Only research can tell us. And once we know that, then we know in which programs at universities to put money. Research is also important for supporting governments develop and revise national standards, curriculum, and other goals, as set by national educational plans. And then finally, for governments, research can support governments in evaluating program implementation and impact. It's one thing to have programs, but to know whether or not you're implementing them effectively and whether they have an impact, we need data, we need research. Next. The second level, which research evidence would be useful for educational implementers and decision makers, is at the regional. In some countries it's the region, in some countries it's the district. In Kenya we call them counties, but also at the zonal, below the district levels, educational managers, school inspectors, and quality assurance officers who are out there in the field to ensure that government policies in the area of education are implemented. So at that level, at the regional district level, whether you are school inspector, you are quality assurance officer, you need to assess, you need research to be able to assess the needs, strength, progress, and performance of schools, teachers, and students at that level. Because you have to, as you realize in this country, for example, in Kenya, there's a lot of competition across counties, but although it is much more at the school level, but you need to assess that to see, is the region or the district you assigned doing a good job of what they should be doing, going by the targets set by government? Secondly, at that level, they'll need research to support the developing and revising of district standards, plans, targets, and goals. And finally, to monitor the implementation and impact of national plans, targeting their regions, their districts, or their zones. Next. The next important person who will need to benefit from research is the school principal or the end of school, the headmaster or the principal. That person will need to assess the needs, strengths, progress, and performance of their teachers and students. They will also need to develop and revise school plans, targets, and goals. A lot of school principals don't plan, but this is one area where research can help a great deal. And finally, principals and heads of schools will need data to monitor the implementation and the impact of teaching programs. Next are the teachers. And again, even if teachers don't do research the way you would define it, a lot of what they do is actually research. And this is how they have to assess the needs, strengths, and progress and performance of students. You don't have to be a professional researcher to do that. A teacher does a lot of research, but it's not appreciated that it's research. Secondly, a teacher has to develop and revise classroom instruction methods on the basis of experience, on the basis of the challenges that they encounter in the classroom. And thirdly, research can assist a teacher understand their professional strengths and weaknesses. In other words, we are saying now, research can take place at the 4 levels: government, regions and districts, at the head teacher and the teacher. So basically, these are the main consumers of the products of research. Next. Yes, it's all right to bank so much on research, but what are some of the challenges in the way of use of research for policy making? We can group them into 3 categories. There are those that are education related, there are those that have much more to do with funding, and there are those that have to do with the wider context within which education operates. Next. Now, in terms of those challenges that have to do with the education system itself, the challenge for educational planners and even people in government is sometimes we are tempted to go for quick fixes. We want quick results, and it's understandable because sometimes the problem has to be dealt with. You know, there are no classrooms, there are no teachers. You do not want to wait to do research to prove that because you can see it, and you have to resolve that problem. You want to start free primary and secondary education. You will not wait because that has been a demand by the community or by political parties. Secondly, is a lot of what needs to be done may appear obvious. So why do research? For example, resorts are bad or they are good. Facilities are not there. Teachers are not there or they are not trained. There isn't enough equipment. We don't have textbook. This is obvious. So you can act on the basis of that. A related challenge is that there is an over-reliance on ideas sold by donors and international consultants. Sometimes we take the shortcut because donors and consultants who come to our countries, and in a lot of educational decision-making in many of our countries, there's a lot of donor influence and consultancies. So sometimes we tend to go for those solutions that are given rather than check on our own experience in terms of what is practical and what is actually happening on the ground. Then there are also constant changes among decision makers and implementers and implementers, such that in a lot of cases there is no continuity. The permanent secretary for Ministry of Education in Kenya today will probably not be not the one when we have the next government, and it will be the same with the directors of education, with the regional officers, and so on. But also there's a problem of bureaucratic inertia. The bureaucracy, what you call red tape, is a problem, not just for use of research, but in terms of other decisions that are educational. Then there is poor or inadequate collection and collation of national education data. I do not know how many ministers of education have up-to-date annual plans. I do not know how many principals are collecting data on their, in their schools and have that data updated on a regular basis, or how many teachers are actually doing, research in the classroom. Then finally, it's a poor or wanting school management. Sometimes the people we have in place may not be that well, prepared, or may not be, very good managers. So it is not realistic to expect that they can do such a good job. Next, please. And I'm coming to the end. Then there are funding related challenges. We don't have enough money. There's very little funding for research, not just education. African countries spend the least in terms of a percentage of their budget and go to research. So it's not just a problem of education. Then we lack basic research, infrastructure, human research, and human resources, computers, internet, and the people who are well trained to do the research. There's limited access to available educational resources, journals. A lot of the journals, top journals in education are not available because a lot of our institutions cannot subscribe, and especially with the ministries of education. There are limited resources to support participation in knowledge sharing meetings, conferences and seminars. It's expensive, big conferences, but this is really the basis of learning a lot of that is new and also sharing experiences from other countries. And then inadequate research and dissemination centers, libraries, documentation centers, very few ministries of documentation centers. And generally countries have not spent very much on this, so that we have places from where you can retrieve information that you can use to influence policy. Let's go to the third set of challenges, which have to do with the context, with the wider context in which education operates. Education decision-making is largely political. And when politicians don't decide to start free primary education or free secondary education because they made that promise during the campaigns, they will rely on sessional papers, on education acts and so on legislation. So it's more of a political nature, and it's not just in Africa, it's worldwide. Then in the wider context, again, there's need to respond to community pressure. People, they will demand certain, they want to do a new school. They want to have more teachers. They want their, girls supported in this way or the other. And government has to respond to that. Then there's also limited appreciation or culture of the use of data for planning. It is not yet caught on, not just here, but in, worldwide. It is very rare for people, the general public, to see the need for the use of data to plan, especially at that level. Then finally, the public and those for whom the policies are meant know no better. If they know no better, then they can have any policies imposed on them. And then the education research community is not aggressive enough or big enough to influence decision making. There are a few people in the universities who are doing education research, but they are not strong enough to be able to bring those resources to influence policy. This is a big problem, and it's mainly related to that community of scholars not being them, taking the bull by the horn and saying, look, we have these findings, we like to influence policy. Maybe it's because they don't have to have a channel, but it's a real problem. Next. So the next steps here, and is to then move on from having understood this. It's to ask questions about what is it that we can do? And I hope the practical bit of this is to give participants an opportunity to design a program that can be used on a priority area considered by the respective countries that can be done to impact on policy. And we are going to give an example from Kenya in the next presentation. Let me stop here. And then the next session is the questions and answers on my presentation and comments. Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kilemi. So I wish to invite Zamzam to take us through the question and answer sessions. Please feel free to ask. This is an opportunity. I think I can see in the room so many policymakers and education stakeholders, people who can come up. We can even come up with a call to action from this workshop. So kindly let us ask those questions. Zamzam, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, just echoing the same sentiments as Yvonne here. Colleagues, please feel free to raise your hands and unmute yourself to ask any questions based on the presentation. As we wait, I think, Doctor, I will go ahead and ask a question as I wait for colleagues to either raise their hands and think of questions at the moment, particularly focusing on the slide where you spoke about education decision-making and the usage of data. I found that really interesting, but I would love to hear your opinion on regarding this evidence behind it. What would you say are some of the barriers at the political level? Is it largely related to underestimating the importance of evidence-based data, and also, the issues around the difficulties of policymakers really grasping that highly specialized research? So what would you say that these are the barriers, and what would be the solution in terms of some of these research being very, very, very detailed and quite difficult for policymakers to understand. So I'll open the floor with that question. And colleagues, as the doctor answers my question, please feel free to raise your hand for follow-up questions or any questions during this presentation. I think you gave a great, concise presentation, so I'm opening the floor now.
Yeah, thank you, Samsam. If you could please just call me Kilemi, that would be good enough. Kilemi, it's easier. On the barriers, I think the main thing is to appreciate that in a lot of our countries, you can see the problem. If I go to Somalia, their interest is not for people to go doing research to check whether or not they need classrooms. It's obvious there's a problem. It's not an issue to check whether or not girls are participating in education. And the politicians will say, look, I mean, we have to implement. And the same with the donors, UNICEF and others, they can see the problem is right there. Secondly, politicians also, make promises about, when we get in as a political party, we'll start a free secondary education, we'll open up universities, we'll make university education free. And, this is part of a manifesto that has to be implemented. So that also is one of the barriers. Thirdly, and I don't know how I missed that in my presentation. Sometimes a lot of research is written in rather complicated jargon. Rarely do we come up with research products that are written in simple non-technical language. It's one of the things I grappled with for a long time in academia myself until I got frustrated, because it's okay to have a good article in the comparative education review that is only read by a few people. But if you want to influence policy, you need to summarize that information in simple non-technical language, what we call policy briefs. So that is also an issue. It's a big issue. And then, of course, there are other issues about infrastructure. Can government afford top-notch researchers to do this? Is there enough collaboration between universities and the people that do research, and so on and so on? These are important issues which we'll continue to explore. And I do hope also participants, going through my presentation, I'm sure they have other ideas about what practical problems they confront themselves, and maybe we can hear a little bit about that. Samson.
Yes, thank you very much. And I absolutely believe, the jargon and the research itself is quite difficult. So how do we shorten that? How do we make that more easier and concise for people is really the only way to move forward. But I'm seeing some people are posting some questions into the chat box. Olive, I don't know if you'd like me to read the question, or you just like to unmute yourself and
yes,
perhaps start the discussion.
Thank you. I think I can say what I've written in the chat box. Thank you, Dr. Kiremi. We know how much you have worked in the education sectors and the beautiful work you've done. My question was on why Kenya keeps on appointing the top persons in the Ministry of Education from other sectors, rather than educationists who have even the research data in their head.
Yeah, thank you.
So I've been in the education sector, and you find that you use a lot of time trying to convince these people, on the research that has been done. Thank you.
Thank you. Samsam, do you want me to take that, or should we get a few more?
Perhaps you can take that, and then if anyone has additional questions, put them into the chat box, and then I will start listing you one by one.
Yeah, what Olivia Bodhi has done is, emphasize one of the points I already made about how a lot of the decisions that are made in education are political. And it therefore goes without saying, a lot of the people that are also appointed may not be educationists as such per se, professional educationists. And remember, politicians are more policymakers, and below them are professionals who should understand the subject. So, when you're appointed a minister of government, ideally you should be able to serve in any ministry. The ideal situation is to have, politicians or ministers in government who have a thorough knowledge of the sector in which they have to operate. But again, the rewards that are given in terms of how you share these possessions will depend on the agreements that were made at the party level. So I agree with you. I mean, to the extent possible, let's have people who understand education, who can, because they can have a better grasp in terms of how they, what kind of policies they come with. But fortunately, a lot of the ministers in education in Kenya and elsewhere also are supported by professionals who know education. All the senior education officers in the Ministry of Education in Kenya, for example, PhDs and master's degrees in education, and people like yourselves at KICD, the director, the current one and the former are educationists. And I would imagine if they are able to, to have access to the ministers, and often there are opportunities like those to exchange ideas, they can influence policies. Politicians are politicians, but what we must ask for is the caste right below them, immediately below them, people who understand education and who can guide them so that a lot of what is done, what is implemented, is not too politicized to be useful. But on why they select these guys, it's I don't think I can answer that. I can't really answer that for the appointing authority. But I can, having been a politician myself, is a trade-offs, and the belief that if you are a minister, your job is more policy making, and you'll have people guiding you who understand the sector well, so that you don't make mistakes that you would otherwise have made because you are not well informed.
Thank you for that. We're getting a few answers, so I think I'll reach out to Lola first, and then we'll go through the chat box questions as well. Lola, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, first, I appreciate Doctor for the work that you've done. And I've seen that somehow for us, it's a paradox in Zambia. You find that someone is well educated, but they fail to translate what they have researched into reality. I don't know whether it's lack of support, but in some cases, it's just wanting accolades and failing to put into reality what is expected. What do you think would be the best way as Africa? Because we have a lot of Africans who are well educated, but our continent is still lagging behind.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I mean, I always worry that Africa is still lagging behind compared to other countries. We always give the example of Kenya, where in 1970, Kenya was ahead of South Korea and Malaysia and those countries. But now we can't compare. Korea is actually a donor to many of these countries. And Zambia was also doing well, Ghana and other countries. But the first question you asked is that there are people who are doing research but are not able to communicate that to policymakers. I think it goes back to the point I made earlier on, and which Samsam also alluded to, that sometimes academics are in a world of their own. They're just out there doing research, and universities, traditional universities are about generation of knowledge, and it's up to those who are consuming it to decide what to do with it. So given that research can be expensive, and given that there is a big need for it in Africa, I think we need to encourage better collaboration between researchers, whether they be the members of the university community or research institutions and NGOs, better collaboration between them and government policymakers. Because if there is this collaboration, governments can quickly, pick up interesting ideas. But that collaboration will not be possible until we are able to interpret or to demystify the results that we have come up with, and bring them up to a point where a politician who is not well versed in education, a policymaker who doesn't understand the jargon of algebra and statistics and so on, can be able to appreciate. So the first thing is increase collaboration between researchers, the academic community, and people who make policies. Secondly, it's for governments and those that are key stakeholders in education to try to see, can you influence legislation about decisions that are made up, on education? And this you can do through lobbying. UNICEF, for example, I've seen occasions where UNICEF have invited policymakers to meetings to share experiences on research that has been done on the girl child, for example. The case of IDRC, I was once involved in a project that IDRC was supporting, that was training both policymakers and researchers in universities with a view to encouraging a strong network among them so that the products of research could be much more useful. So it's about collaboration. It's about demystifying that I said, but it's also about government accepting that there is something that they can learn from those that do research. And finally, for Africa not to lag behind, I think it's important to prioritize education, but it's not just prioritizing by putting money in education, and by ensuring that the money that is put in education, the 2/3 of the national budget, is actually utilized to improve the quality of education. Because the biggest challenge now in Africa is, it's okay, we have free secondary primary education in some countries, and some countries are also implementing free secondary education. The more important question now is, can that quality compete? If we are rated against countries like Korea and others in terms of the main international exams, how do we perform? Because if we do not perform well as Africa at that basic level, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to compete at the higher education level. So it is investment, but it's investment in the right education, and to ensure that that money that is put in there actually generates the results that can prepare Africa to compete.
A really great response there. And I think some of the questions that are coming in, particularly from Delmesh, sorry for the pronunciation, is regarding around policy. So I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, Delmesh, and let me know how you pronounce your name appropriately. And then following that, just for the interest of time, I think we're going to take multiple questions. So following that is Mohammed, who's focusing more on, the fact of how academics will reach the fields and how that connection. But Mohammed, you can also unmute yourself after Delmesh. Delmesh, please unmute yourself so we can understand your question.
Thank you very much, Zamzam. My point is, there is a research paradigm between qualitative and quantitative approach, and how the policymakers really see the benefits of the qualitative research for policy inputs, because there is a high level of linkage between quantitative research to the policy. The policymakers demand the wide coverage to convince its own client. What is your reflections on that? Thank you.
Thank you. And then next, Mohammed, in regards to the academic reaches, essentially, from my understanding, you're asking about whether or not, if academia can actually reach what is going on in real current affairs. But perhaps if there's a miscommunication there, let us know. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Samsam. You get the point. That's right. And my question was about, that a lot of efforts are doing by the universities or academic field, but how can we rely on that academic research on the real field? That's my question. And the quality of the research that they are doing in the academic field and the reality in the field. Yeah. Thank you.
And I'll allow you to answer those questions.
Thank you, Samsam. Thank you, Mohammed and Damlash. The question about academics and the research that they do, it's an important one, because a lot of education research takes place in universities and research institutes, but there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect in that very little of that, if at all, gets to policymakers, because policymakers and government often will commission their own research projects, will go to donors to support consultancies that will for the development of educational plans. I always complained about the fact that very rarely are we using a lot of our own people. But academics are also to blame because, like I said, they have not organized themselves as a lobby that can increase their own visibility in terms of showing what is it that they have done that can impact on policy, even before government goes ahead to commission, other organizations or consultants to do that. But there is also a suspicion that has to be dealt with, that has to be confronted between universities and governments. traditionally, for a long time, universities were being seen often as opponents, as opponents of what happened in government. So until that suspicion goes also, and until government accept that our universities have something to offer that even consultants from outside cannot, because they understand that better, then we'll not make much progress. But to resolve that issue is to encourage more networking between people in government and academics. But for academics themselves to confront the problem and say, look, here we have something we can offer. And you don't just, you don't even have to go directly to ministries to do that. If our own academics in our universities have interest in research, there is nothing to prevent them from simplifying those articles and doing articles in local newspapers, for example. There is nothing to prevent them from talking in radio stations and trying to reach out. There is nothing to prevent them from appearing on national television. There is nothing to prevent them from using their large student populations to go disseminating. There is a university student in virtually every village to go disseminating what they have learned. So I think the universities themselves are not doing a good job of utilizing and taking advantage of the capital that they have in terms of numbers, in terms of the little research they have done, but also in terms of the fact that they know much better than a lot of us, but they are not translating that into impacting upon what happens in their own countries. So in a sense, having been an academic myself, I know we are quite a bit to blame. So we have to do a little bit more than that. And I hope this kind of project, because government will not be able to support all the research projects that are needed, rather than go out to the donor community and, for organizations that support research, can we try to build a relationship or strengthen our relationship with research departments in our universities, such that we introduce better collaboration, such that if there is a research project and government is interested in, or an donor organization is interested in, like UNESCO IDRC, that has got something to do with policy, why don't we pair up a university researcher with a policy maker, and so on and so on. So, and maybe some of these ideas will come out of this project in terms of how we can, because it's not just about using research findings, it's being able to access them. It's being able for universities to tell people and government and the general populace, like, look, we have found this to be the case. I can tell you for sure, if universities come up with findings on basic education, or higher education or whatever, that are very high catching, that interest the public, the government, politicians will have no choice but to begin to go back to university and to see how they can work. So that's one. The question about qualitative and quantitative research, both are useful. We need data. We need quantitative data on enrollments, on how many girls are joining school, how many are staying in there, on participation, on number of teachers and how many are trained, on the textbooks that are available in schools and how they are being used, on educational budget that being spent, on how money that is being spent is used across the various vote hands in government, in ministries of education. But we'll also need qualitative data that does not require a lot of mathematics, a lot of statistics, in terms of what are the real challenges that girls are facing in participation. Some of them have got to do with tradition. Some of them have got to do with the culture. Some of them have got to do with the environment. Why is it that some school principals do better than other school principals? This is qualitative data. What makes one principal more effective? Is it the way they manage their time? Is it the way they relate with students? Is it the way they relate with their teachers? Is it the way they relate with their communities? Why is there a big problem of drug addiction in our schools? Again, this is more of a qualitative issue. The real challenge, therefore, is to be able to ask questions about how do we balance the quantitative and qualitative, and in which sectors, for which kinds of problems we need to do quantitative research, and which topics require much more understanding about qualitative issue, about what is happening in the classroom, about how teachers behave, about the challenges that girls are facing, and so on and so on. In brief, let me say both are useful. The important thing is to strike a balance and to ask for the priority of countries. If the issue now is checking about participation, enrollments, is it quantitative research that we need? Is it qualitative research or a combination? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I think in terms of, there's a lot of questions regarding really establishing this closer collaboration between research and policymakers. And for the interest of time, I think what we'll do is start with Lynette from AFCAN to go first, just because her question is quite linking to your responses. So Lynette, if you want to unmute yourself, and then colleagues following that, we'll jump back to Sekeke and the last three, Olive. And that will be the last three questions to be answered. So Lynette, please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Zamzam. Thank you, Dr. Ari, for your presentation. You have highlighted the disconnect between research, policy, and practice, and also given us some examples from organizations that have made some good attempts to support dissemination and uptake of findings. I just wondered whether you might share some examples of where this is done in a more systematized way, where it's not dependent on donor budgets, donor priorities, and who is willing, who is not. Is there a mechanism we can use to make sure that this happens regularly, particularly within government? I don't know whether we have a research agenda in Kenya, for example, and how do practitioners feed into that agenda? How does the voice of the practitioner influence policies, and whether there's a systemic way in which, you know, this whole conversation can happen, so that it's not left to those who are willing and those who have budgets to do these kinds of things. Thank you.
And the next question from Lesotho, Sekele, can you please answer, unmute yourself? And apologies for the mispronunciation. Hello? As we wait for you to unmute yourself, can I move on to Olive? Olive, can you unmute yourself and share your question? And then we'll try again with Lesotho.
Yes, this is Olive. Thanks again for the nice presentation, but I think I don't have more of questions. Mine are more of comments. And I think I would like Dr. Kilemi to note that even some of the research that is done in this country, especially in the institutions of education, is sometimes doctored by the same policymakers if it turns out to be negative to what they want to say. So that is also one challenge that we must counter in this country if you have to get research addressing education issues. I've been in forums where the policymakers will come and say, you cannot say that, even though the data has said you. I mean, that is what is happening. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question from Lesotho, Selekeka, I don't know if you're able to hear, but I'm happy to go ahead and just read the question for you. So essentially, it's mainly focusing on why donors keep on allocating fundings into projects that end with less impact or no impact. So that is the last question.
Okay. Well, let me take them as they came. Lynette Okengo, you challenged me to come up with something that I consider working regarding how you close this disconnect, this gap between what people like yourselves are doing in research and the policymakers, in view of the many factors that we spoke about. There have been efforts to do networks. Unfortunately, a lot of those educational networks that have brought policymakers and researchers together are donor-driven. I have not known of many examples of politicians and government saying, look, we need to reach out to our academics out there. It's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge for Africa. Maybe it's a challenge that can be addressed at the national legislation level. And I keep on challenging academics themselves to try to get to parliament, to try to be legislators, because if they go in there, they can influence that, that agenda. But meanwhile, we have to take advantage of an opportunity like this one. This is an opportunity that's bringing academics, NGO, participants, and donors together to deliberate on how is it that we can get research to be more impactful. So we have researchers, we have policymakers, and we have consumers of that research, who are also interested in implementing it, who are not government. So I ideally hope, maybe one of the outcomes of this, this GPE KIX project is to, again, think strongly. Even if you have to make, this idea emanate from government, because that's where, GPE is mainly working on. Is there a way of influencing an agenda whereby government can say, look, let us devote some resources and time and money to reach out to academics and to other researchers and begin to have a conversation as a team? Because unless we do that, government on themselves can't, because their business is not to do research all the time. And it is not enough to just depend on what you commission when there's a lot there that we can use. I think I would, take the challenge and say, this is an opportunity here, but see how we can get government to be the main driver of that agenda, as opposed to, donors that have driven previous agenda. But let me say, it's a challenge, Lynette. Okay, well, let's all continue to think about it. It's a tough one. But again, it depends. I mean, if you go to Asian countries, you go to China they decide what kind of policies, have to implement it. And they even decide what kind of researches will be conducted in universities. And the same would be, I have had that experience also in Singapore and South Korea. But these are countries with resources that are put in research. The big challenge in Africa, in many of the African countries, is that our allocation to research is much less than what is recommended, worldwide by the UN. So, and we have to also, unless we increase that allocation, and in brief saying that unless we prioritize research and put money there, then it's going to be difficult for government to say, look, we have this money for research and we need university people to do this, and we need to have more interaction between ourselves, NGOs, and the university community. So the first thing is, it's got to come from government. Come from government in terms of how much money is allocated, because once there are resources, then they can be spent for the right results. In Kenya recently, they have put money in Council for Science and Technology. They have a research fund. The government has set up a research fund. It's not that much, but I would say it's a beginning. So with that, with prioritizing and putting money, and with an opportunity like this one for GPE KIX to say, look, we can start a program that brings these people closer with a clear agenda and with priorities identified by government and driven by government, but inviting participants, non-government people like Lynette, Bodia, and others to be part of that team. This is as much as I can say on that. But let me say that it's a challenge, because I've not seen it happening very much. But this is no reason to give up and say to give up on an idea that, if implemented, can make quite a difference. The question about by Bodia, Olivia, on policymakers accepting if you could please rephrase that question again, Olivia, or if Samsung, if you remember.
Hello.
Yes, please, Bodia.
Yeah, it was not more of a question, but something for you to note, because I've been in the education sector now for almost 30 years. And I find some of the institutions, even with the research data, sometimes when it brings out what the policymakers don't want to hear, the politicians, then—
Yes, I get it. I now got it. Yes,
yes.
I get it. And let me tell you, it's not just government. I mean, governments are very sensitive, especially on any radical changes. You remember, governments like universities can be very, very conservative institutions. And sometimes are not ready. Sometimes they will not accept challenges because this is a position taken by a political party. We want free primary education. We want free secondary education. You can't question, you can't ask, do you have the teachers? Do you have the money? Do you have the labs to make sure that you provide quality education? Sometimes it's not acceptable because it's a political decision and it's got to be done. So yes, it's true, there are those instances. But again, remember, there's a huge gap between people in politics and people in academia in terms of their understanding of these issues. So it's with time. And gradually it's an approach that allows a closer collaboration, more mixing through networking, and and demystifying the researcher as the one who knows everything, or the government person as the one also who is not ready to listen to what's coming out from there. But it's not just governments that do not want. I have found and experience of many donor organizations that tell me as a consultant, you can't say this when you are talking to government. You know, I did a, you know, sometimes ago I did a project for UNESCO on whether or not Mbarara Institute for, you know, for Development Standards should set up as a university. I did point out that the institution was not ready to be a fully fledged university because of, you know, facilities were there. They didn't have academics who are trained enough to support that. But because it was a project from government, donors sometimes are very sensitive about government. So that could not be accepted. And the problem of not accepting the real truth is not just a problem of politicians. I can tell you from my experience, donors are also culprits in this regard. Finally, Seleteka, on why donors, it's why they allow, it's why donors, it's that the question was why donors allow an overlap, why they repeat what is already happened. Seleteka. Samsam, do you remember?
Yeah, no, the question is in regards mainly about there's a lot of donor funding, but there has not been a lot of impact, or that's what the
okay. Yeah. yes. Yes. This is a big problem, and it is very true. I can tell you, a lot of research. We commissioning money. Sometimes donors are accused of, you know, trying to spend money because they have money, because sometimes they are judged by whether or not they've been able to spend that money. So they will give that money for research, and but also have no way of following whether or not the research that have supported with government has been followed by way of implementation. Maybe because it's not their business to force government to do certain things. But again, yes, there's a disconnect. There's a lot of good work lying out in the shelves of both, you know, government ministries and in donor organization. And sometimes we repeat what already has been done, because what was done in the first place was not implemented. So it's again an issue. Apart from just saying that we are not using research to influence policy, I think we need to be talking much more about to what extent have we used what has already been done. And there's a lot of that. I can tell you there's a lot of that. We are not asking enough questions about whether or not what was recommended 10 years ago is being used before we repeat the same thing. We are also not asking questions about donor overlaps, duplication of efforts, because donors themselves, especially with regard to use of consultants and research projects and so on, sometimes don't have an opportunity to sit together and say, look, these are the priorities. You know, as much as there's been a lot of talk about donor coordination, it's in reality, it's still not, we have not got there. So we need to ask to follow up. And follow up is not just about government, it's about the people that are putting money. But we need to find a mechanism, therefore, of ensuring that we can do this without making anybody defensive. But it is true, you are right, it's a problem. And again, I hope this kind of initiative, you know, Yvonne and Samsam and Gabriel and all of us and Joy, is an opportunity again to begin to ask these hard questions about a lot is done, it's been done, we are repeating it, we are making mistakes in spite of the fact that there is already evidence we can use to correct those mistakes. So what is the problem and how do we go around that?
Thank you. And thank you, colleagues. And a big thank you to our presenter as well. I think we really had a great discussion, really talking about some of these solutions in terms of really enhancing and transferring the use of utilization of research. As we've discussed, basically, it's really about this multi-directional. And I think the presentation really alluded to that, and, you know, both academic and professional knowledge between multiple partners. So of course, there's going to be multiple challenges. So thank you all for this insightful conversation, and I'm sure you'll all have an opportunity to continue to have this discussion. I'll pass it on to Yvonne. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zamzam. Thank you, colleagues, for the questions that we are asking. I think we're beginning to ask the tough questions that Kilemi is talking about. And we are hoping that we will move somewhere with this. We're hoping it's not going to end with 3 workshops. We are going to continue discussions even beyond the workshops. So allow me, because of time, to invite Dr. Kilemi just to give us a case of Kenya, and just for us to be able to see how government is able to use research. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you again. And one of the tasks I was given as a consultant by Yvonne and our team was to come up with some case study, at least one, as an example of how research can impact on policy. I chose this particular one on Kenya, on harmonizing secondary school fees in the country. The reason I picked on this as a good example is because the people who conducted the research, if you can go to the next slide, Gabriel, is that the team that was involved in the research was multifaceted. So, and first of all, I'll say a little bit about the background. It was to harmonize secondary school fees and was set up by the president in 2014. And the reason was that the school fees is very unregulated and left many youths out of secondary education because teachers can, principals can decide on how much to charge and nobody questions them. And of course, the problem here is a contradicting government commitment to quality secondary education for all and everything that we say as the international community about education as a human right, especially basic education. And but the great thing about this, and for us as a team, is that it was a research project that was almost action-oriented. But beyond that, it included any major actor in secondary education, all of them, from donors. Please, let's proceed, Gabriel. I am also conscious that we don't have that much time, and I think we can skip this. Basically, it was to find ways of how we can make secondary education cheaper by looking at both the fees charges, the policies, practice in secondary schools, as well as any other factors that make secondary education expensive. Next. Next. So, on the research process, first, the most important aspect of this project for me was that government people were in it, school principals were in it, NGO representatives were in this, donor representatives were in this team, and together, even school leaders, even leaders of secondary schools like prefects and so on. So together we sat down and came up with a design to ask the relevant questions. It was a great opportunity for all those involved in this sector could ask similar questions as a team. And we began by looking at the review of literature. I happened to lead that task force, as a matter of fact. We reviewed literature on the situation of secondary education in Kenya, then conducted workshops at the county and sub-county levels with other players to ask the same questions. And then did interviews and with focus group discussions at schools, with school principals and their representatives, with the donors to education. And then, we put these views together, did a report, which was discussed at a national validation workshop for ownership purposes. Those that were not part of the project were then brought in, all the leaders of education from the provinces and the districts, and we discussed this, and we all agreed that we should move forward on the basis of our understanding of the problem with secondary education and the solutions that were being presented. Then of course a final report. Next. Next, please. It's blank. So, if the idea was to establish whether or not secondary school education is too expensive for the majority, and the extent to which that was a handicap for many who would like to participate, there is no better example than what we found when we looked at the fees that were being charged and what actually should be the actual cost. And let me tell you how we determined the actual cost. We did calculations on what students need to feed on. We need calculations on what is required for uniform. We need calculations on everything that is being spent, including on support staff in schools, and came up at what would be a good unit cost, given that government will provide teachers. So this is it, because that's a given. So we found out that the national schools like Alliance and Mango and so on, the very top elite schools, were charging between $1,000 and $1,500 per annum. That's between 100,000 and 50,000 Kenya shillings. But actually, after our calculations and sitting down with principals of schools themselves, we found that the most realistic, the actual cost was approximately $500, 1/3 of the cost. For extra county schools, or what some people call provincial schools, they were charging between $600 and $700. But again, after calculations, we found that $420 would do for the same kind of education, as long as teachers were provided. For the county schools, which are in districts, we charge between 500 and 600. After our calculations, we found that if they charge $380 per annum, it would still be good enough, more than good enough. And then the day schools, $200 to $500. But actually, the actual cost, $110. So in other words, the cost of education was too much compared to what was actually needed to get that kid through secondary school. Next, Gabriel. So basically, the fees were exaggerated. And the problems and to do with both policy, the way the schools were run. At the level of policy was that because money, sometimes the grants that are meant to go to schools would be delayed, principals for schools would then be tempted to ask pupils and their, to pay, parents to pay. Then there was a problem of an unplanned expansion. Again, because of the political nature of education decision making, politicians, when we decided to build schools all over, and if you have not planned that, you have not planned for the teachers. And if you don't plan for the teachers, parents have to pay for the teachers. So if they pay, you are passing the burden to parents. Then an equitable distribution or inefficient use of resources was a big problem. It's a lot of the facilities and resources are in schools. Nobody checks the extent to which these facilities are cost effectively used, especially because school managers themselves not necessarily very well trained on the use of resources. Then inability to regulate the cost of learning materials. The cost of learning materials would range from anything, depending on what the principals and the boards of governors decided. Then the issue about poor performance and reputation. The more kids repeat, the more expensive it is for education, because you're having one kid spend 3 times what they should have spent if they're being supported by government. And if you perform badly again, it's an expense because you have not got the outcome that is expected. It's just like a business. It's like you are making losses. And then, on policy is a stiff competition for secondary school places in the best schools by primary school leavers. Because of that competition, because like now, we just in Kenya, the Kenya Certificate of Primary Education results are out. Parents are after the best schools. When you compete for those places, it means some schools will be more expensive than the others. It's like supply and demand. The schools that kids want to go to, principals can decide, look, you want to come in, you have to pay a little bit more. And you have to, and then they introduce other types of costs. Next slide, Gabriel. And then there are school-related factors outside of policy. And this range from overcharging of school fees by school heads. They would introduce fees that are not been approved by the Ministry of Education. Introduction of unapproved levies by ends of schools. Like you said, look, we need to buy a bus. We need to do a swimming pool. We need to introduce money to motivate teachers so that teachers can go on a trip. They introduced those kinds of expenses which were not, allocated, which were not, agreed upon by government. Then there are poor systems of accounting for school resources. Some principals are untouchable. There are principals who are out there. They are so big. They run big schools. They do favors to everyone, including senior people in government and politicians. And sometimes you don't want to touch them, whether or not they increase the school fees. Then there's the inefficient use of available resources. Again, that's common. You have more teachers than you need. Sometimes the time teachers are spending on task, it's been estimated in Kenya, in primary and secondary, especially in primary schools, teachers spend no more than 40% of the time they should be spending in the classroom because they're doing other things. They're trying to do things that will make them survive. They're teaching in private schools. There's a lot of absenteeism and so on. You have buses, school buses that are used only once a week. You have football pitches that are hardly used. There are facilities. You have a swimming pool that is never used and so on and so on. So, resources are there. Books are not well used. They are mishandled. So, they do not even last the 5 years or 4 years they are supposed to last. So essentially, inefficient use of available resources. I've always said, if we use the money that we have for education, I think we can go much further than we do if that money is used efficiently. And then, of course, parents. There are parents who never speak out. Even if they are called to parents' meetings, they will never dare challenge the principal because they fear that their children will be victimized. As a result, principals continue to ask for whatever they want to ask for. Next slide, please, Gabriel. So, we, after doing this, and we found that the fees were exaggerated, and therefore locking out of youth, locking out a lot of youth from secondary education, we came up with some ideas. And this is where policy now, this is truly impacting on policy. And some of the recommendations related to how do you make the system more efficient, and the others related to what can parents do to ensure that things are better. With regard to efficiency savings, is to cap school fees. You have to decide this is the maximum that you can charge, and only government can make that decision and stick to it. Secondly, is dispersing funds based on actual numbers of students and teachers and not the declared, because you'll find in a lot of our schools, there are a lot of ghost students. Of course, there are also ghost teachers who are being paid salaries. So principals, because they are going to be allocating grants on the basis of number of students, they will exaggerate the numbers, which makes education expensive because you're actually spending more money than you should. Then, classification of schools. We recommended that don't classify schools into national, county schools and day schools, because those that are classified higher will be sought after and they'll be more expensive, and therefore necessarily bring up the cost of education. We said also we should forget ranking of schools based on examination performance, because examinations don't tell the whole story. But the problem with that is, like now, we've ranked our secondary school examination results on the basis of the best schools in the country. So we have the top 200 schools. The problem with that is that parents will want to go to those schools, and those that are not being ranked will not have any customers. Therefore, you force a demand and an expense that would not have been anticipated. And yet, what you are doing is you are comparing the incomparables. You are comparing oranges and mangoes. Schools that are better endowed will do better than those who are not. These schools cannot do as well as a top national school that has everything. So again, we say do not rank schools. And if you rank them, please rank them on the basis of value handed. Like the top national schools will take the best students. The middle level schools will take students who have the next level of performance. And then the day schools will take the lowest. If I was ranking schools, the most important question for me would be, what value have you added to that grade? And if a those school has improved from an average of a C to an A and B minus, and the national school has retained at the level of A, because they got the A grade student, for me, the day school has done better. But that's not how we are doing it. So essentially, we are comparing what is not comparable, and therefore still emphasizing and making it impossible for parents not want to go for those schools that are being ranked out there, although that ranking is not based on actual reality in terms of what happens. We said we should also intensify the quota system of admission all the way to university. This is the reason, and you see, if you are schools that cannot compete for places in university because you are day school or because you are county school, you are not a national school, it's going to be very difficult for parents to accept to send their kids to those kinds of schools. Therefore, places in national universities must be proportionate, or at least must take account of the disadvantaged situation of some of the schools compared to those that are dominating university places. And then, we ask government to enforce fees guidelines and institute heavy penalties for those for principals who are offenders, and then rein on book cartels and the limit number of books. The more books you allow, the more room you leave for abuse, and the more you leave it to the book cartels to make decisions, the more expensive books will become. We also said parents have a role. This is not just about government, and therefore we ask parents, and we have to educate them to demystify the notion of free education. That if you believe education is free, then you will not contribute. And if you don't contribute, you are not going to add any value. And contribute is important because government will not be able to do everything. Secondly, we recommended that we make it clear to parents that this is a shared responsibility. Education is a shared responsibility. Parents have to bear the cost of clothing and food for their children and transport. Meanwhile, government can put in books, build laboratories, and bring teachers. But we also did recommend that parents who are genuinely unable to pay to benefit from the bursary program. Not every parent is those that are not able to pay. Sometimes you find parents, children who are benefiting from multiple bursaries, from the banks, from government, from their members of parliament, and from their governors. And yet, there are those who do not get anything. So the question here is ensuring that first you ensure the genuine benefit, but you also coordinate those bursary resources to ensure that there is no duplication and that you put them in one basket. If you do that, no kid will be left. Then we said parents should oversee utilization of school funds and school management and quality of education. Unless parents are involved and you leave it only to head teachers and government functionaries, you're never going to get value for money. Parents have to be there to own it and to ensure that their children are actually getting what they said that they would like to get and that they can compete irrespective of the school they have enrolled in. Next, Gabriel. Thank you. We also came up with the recommendations related to management. How can you improve this? Or rather, how can you achieve more with less? Resources will never be limitless. Therefore, at the school level, it's important to optimize use of teachers by paying greater attention to absenteeism. Teachers can do much more. And maybe one way of preventing absenteeism is to consider using teacher biometrics, where you can tell, whether or not teachers are attending and how long they're in class, and you don't have to be at the school to know that. A ministry official at the regional office or the headquarters can tell. So this is important. This is an important reform because absenteeism is a problem in virtually all our countries. And it's very difficult to control it because sometimes there is a conspiracy between principals and the teachers they are overseeing, and the education officers themselves may not be able to visit schools as much as they would like. Then depend on carefully worked out staffing norms, that you don't just post teachers. Please check on the numbers and ensure that that these are proportionate to the number, that rather that you're getting value for money. Establish a clear policy on the establishment of new schools, that you can't just start schools. I mean, you do need to do a mapping so that you don't build a school, a secondary school, 1 kilometer away from the other, because the catchment for their students is the same. The resources that are available are limited. And this is a political decision and it's got to be made. And therefore, in other words, we are saying professionalize decisions on starting new schools. Then merge small schools and rationalize school distribution. Establish minimum number of the most essential and teaching staff and recruit more skilled workers where possible. Instead of having support staff that are only specialized in one area, can you have support staff that can do multiple tasks? In terms of management, we also recommended more transparency in the management of school resources. Publicize funds, donations received on the notice board, school notice boards. Let principals of schools pin down and show that, and so that everybody can know we got so much money for books, we got so money for this and that. Install an efficient system of continuously capturing teacher and student data. This is a problem in most of our countries. And also, the point about biometrics, we already made, that's a repetition. Establish schools needs annually and well in advance, rather than, just respond. Make it spontaneous response. Be in advance, make sure you know what schools need so that you can plan for them well in advance, other than, make it like you're dealing with emergency situations. Then be sticklers to the Procurement and Disposal Act. And have stiff penalties for those who don't, and then build capacity for school managers and continuously upgrade their skills. Next, management skills. Again, we also give ideas about measures that can help reduce costs. And this will include intensifying use of ICT to reach out to more learners. You can reach to a lot more through ICT, and you can have computers or ICT lessons where one good teacher can be shared by many students. You can, you have school buses that are used by different schools. Why not share that? Get neighboring schools to share underutilized resources, teachers, laboratories, sports fields, and buses. Let us imbibe, let us nurture a culture of maintenance. It's a big problem. It's like we don't know what maintenance is in a lot of our countries. And use students to perform some tasks cleaning, gardening, and general income, and to generate income for their schools. Next. So finally, let me quickly go through what we consider to be the major impact of this research project. I realize you're running out of time. In 3 minutes, I'll do that. First of all, we have free primary education in Kenya. It was recommended by the task force on the basis of, and they gave examples of how it can be achieved by reducing costs. It was not until 2019 this was started. Then, because there was a prior planning, many secondary schools are overcrowded, but this challenge will be overcome. So free secondary was introduced as a result of the project. But obviously, you expected overcrowding, but this is being dealt with time. Then cost sharing has become a reality. Parents have taken more responsibility for the education of their children by taking over uniform, accommodation, and meal expenses, while government provides teachers and teaching learning materials, and local leaders also participate. Next. As we conclude, the annual unit cost reduced drastically, as we've shown, so education became much more affordable, and more poor children can now can access post-secondary training opportunities if you can go to day schools that are subsidized and that are cheap. A lot of young people that will never made it to university because they couldn't afford boarding and school education are now getting into university and other training opportunities. And day schools are being increasingly accepted. And with time, phasing out of boarding schools could be a real possibility. Just like in Europe and America, day schools are the majority. I think that's why we need to be headed if we want to truly democratize education. And finally, educational secondary schools are more common now, which gives young people an opportunity to grow together and to appreciate the opposite gender better. I think next. That's it. I'm sorry I ran through quickly, but I just realized we're also running out of time because we have only like another 10 minutes. But thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Clemi. I've seen a couple of questions in the chat room. I will also just inform the participants that some of these questions we will answer them, and then we will be able to send you when we'll be sending the presentations to you. So we may not be able to take all the questions today, but maybe I will allow just a room for one question that is really pressing. Kindly just unmute yourself and then ask, and then we move to the next one. Someone who has not, maybe Lagos or Koye. We've not heard from Lagos yet. Okay, maybe I can ask a question that is was shared by Mohammed Hassan. In the classification, there's a kind of motivating the school community. So what is the other manner to use? They're saying classification motivates the school community. So how else can you motivate the community?
Okay, yeah, you want me to give a go at that? Yes, yes. Classification, the problem with classification and ranking is that it's a system that supports privilege. The top schools admit students, a majority of whom who are advantaged. And it makes it impossible, for example, for a rural kid from a peasant background to make it to a national school in Kenya because, first of all, they can't invest in expensive private education. It's the same with ranking. It's the same with ranking. Ranking is, really, basically, I always say, sometimes we mistake privilege for merit. And that's what ranking does. So we should ask questions about, if I come from this kind of environment that is not urban, should I really be compared to someone who is in a national school that is completely, fully endowed and, even where parents are able to support? So this is why I came up with the idea of let us compare the comparables and let us judge performance in schools on the basis of the kinds of institutions, the kinds of environments our students are operating in, both at home and in the schools. And on the basis of that, we can award performance on the basis of what value you have added. But we cannot compare a kid in a day school with one in a national school. Because if you do that, a kid in a day school will never get an opportunity to do medicine in our universities, you know, and so on and so on. So that you find that in a lot of our schools, medicine and other competitive programs are taken by those who come from the already advantaged schools and therefore advantaged backgrounds. We're locking out the majority. In Africa, the majority are poor, 60%. Can you have a country develop that locks out the majority of the people? These are important questions. And the important question in policy questions. And the main point here, therefore, is how can we achieve equity? And for me, it's about fairness. And therefore, how can we achieve equity that responds to the bigger numbers the same way you respond to the smaller numbers? And it's about quota systems. It's about maybe democratizing school education and making all schools equal. This is the point I was making when I said eventually maybe we'll phase out all boarding schools, such that we'll all be able to, day schools will be the most common. If day schools are the most common, then you have, even though you have not completely eliminated inequality, you are getting closer and closer. But even them will not be interesting unless you make sure that the day schools that you start have all the basics. You have good laboratories, you have good libraries, you have good computer labs, and that a kid from day school, therefore, can compete with another because of all the facilities they need, including very good teachers. But it's a challenge. But again, this is another opportunity for us to think more and brainstorm and figure out together how we can address this, because it's important that we pay attention to the majority. Often, our education systems are more about the minority because we focus on the top grades, we focus on those who go to university, and yet the majority of the kids cannot. So what is it that we can do as Africa to address the very majority, who also have a big role to play, but about whom we always don't pay the greatest attention?
Thank you so much, Dr. And I think that brings us to the next session that we're supposed to, this is an open session. So like you say correctly, we need to figure out how best to cater for everybody across board without just targeting the minority. So the next session we're going to have is the plenary, where we would like to discuss participants' views on how best to strengthen the role of data in policy making. So we have heard from you. We also need to hear from those in the house. So how best can we strengthen the use of data? I'm not seeing a hand. This is an open discussion, kindly. Or if you have a question to Dr. confirming or about the information he has just shared on the case study, please go ahead. But I really wish to know what your thoughts on how best we can strengthen the use of data. Yes, Chifunero, please go ahead. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. This is Chifunero from Malawi. I think one way of strengthening the use of data is a good dissemination of results after research, because I think sometimes there are a lot of research that documents that if, for example, you say available accessibility by most people, it's not there. So that's why maybe you find out that maybe some of the NGOs or maybe even government can there was a word that was used in, cannot make full use of it, or can duplicate the same thing that the other is doing without even
We're having trouble hearing you.
Data. So I think when research, so that wants to, Can you hear me?
You keep breaking. I think your connection is not so good, but I can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So basically, I was saying, if results of research, that if data is made available or accessible to all in different platforms where one can easily have access, it would be easier to make use of it, because many people have done research in different areas that would if one can just get hold of the data, they can make use of it, but it's not really available. It's not accessible in different forms so that it can reach out to everyone. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Olive, please go ahead.
Yes, I think the first thing we must make sure is that in Africa, and that means our country, we need to get very credible research data. That is, we must make sure that the data is corrected in the right way and it is credible enough. Then we must get the right people in the right places who can be able to understand that data and interpret it and put it into policy. I think those are two key things for me. Quality data, well documented, and of course in the right of the in the hands of the right people who can be able to interpret it clearly and be able to support what has been found out. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Joseph, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Joseph, I'm calling from Ghana. I hope you can hear me. Yes, the first thing that I observed was during the presentation, I think the presenter mentioned quantitative data. So I was a bit confused because the data was gathered using focus group and interviews. So I was thinking it would be qualitative anyway. Yes, but the point I'm trying to make is we are finding it difficult. I'm in the university anyway. We are finding it difficult to make government accept our data or accept our research. And the basic reason is that they tend to rely on their manifestos. So for example, if the party has decided to implement ABC policies and you do your research and you have the contrary, they believe that by accepting you, they are looking at you as a different opposition and that kind of thing. So I would suggest that these the non-governmental organizations use a lot of dissemination platforms because they see them as neutral organizations. Because sometimes they can even paint you with a certain brush. So if you talk about policy, so we can't implement it because we already have something that we are putting it in place from our manifestos. So that has been a big challenge. So if that is addressed to the non-governmental organizations, I think it will help a lot, like what World Vision is doing here in Ghana. So disseminate the research findings. I think they buy into it more than researchers in the universities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I think there's a question somewhere in there about whether quantitative data was used, and I think Clemi will be able to answer that later. So Sekele, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam. Responding to what you are asking us to share our views, and I would say to make research more usable, research should be written in the right quality for the audience. That is, it should target the audience and be accessible to the audience it is intended to consume. Also, the research itself should be valid and reliable, depending on the collection of data, the methods used to carry out the research, and the quality of the question that is being asked. Is it a question that will bring the real solution or the real data that will be useful? Thank you very much. Hello?
Thank you so much, Kelekele, for your contribution. And I think we're both saying that you are both saying the same thing. I think Kilemi had alluded to that earlier on as well, that sometimes the research that is there, even the language used to express the findings is too technical to be understood. So you are rightly pointing out that it needs to be at the level of the user. Whoever is going to use that research should be able to understand it. Thank you. So because of time, we are said we are going up to 5. I will have to stop. We'll have to stop there. But first of all, let me give Dr. Kilemi an opportunity, maybe to answer the few questions that are there, for instance, about the quantitative research. And then I have posted a question in the chat box. Kindly, we need to start thinking about that for the next session. So what are some of the other ways that we can use? We're looking for, we need to explore approaches to strengthen the role of data and evidence use in policymaking. So as we come for the next session, that is where we'll be starting. What are some of these approaches that we can use, alternative approaches that we can use to strengthen the use of data in policymaking? So Kilemi, kindly go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Yvonne, and the participants. It's been extremely interesting, I must say. But the points that have been made, you know, like Kamondo, for example, about dissemination of results, I think it's well taken, that unless we disseminate more and unless we are able to communicate more what we have found, there's no use doing it. So it's a challenge to all of us that are involved in research, including NGOs and the donor community. But that dissemination, the point has been made, has to be targeted, has to be accessible, but has to be research that is also of quality, that it can be trusted. It's got to be credible. You should not insist that you know, your research should be used if it's not of any quality, if it's not accessible, if you can't summarize it in a language that's understandable. And I like the idea of NGOs being the neutral habit, being more neutral, to be much more involved in disseminating these ideas. The point that Dr. Kobina raised about that this was more qualitative research. No, it was not. Qualitative in the sense that we need focus group discussions, but we did the calculations also in terms of how much parents were paying for whatever and what it would cost to buy bags of maize and, you know, to buy pens and books and that. So it was a good case study in the sense that it did both qualitative and quantitative data as basic as would be required, and also was able to summarize this for policymakers in a language that they understood. So essentially, and then the point you made about manifestos, I think we discussed it earlier on, the politicians, and, you know, saying that, look, if we don't achieve this, then we don't get voted back because we promised it. This is a political question we have to confront, but much more will therefore be required of those of us that are also in academia to make sure their voice is felt, and that and those who are seen to be in between, you know, the academic and the policymaker, to play their role in bringing together these groups to the extent possible. And I do agree with you, Yvonne, as I conclude, that we have set a very good ground, good foundation for the next phase. And I hope we should focus much more on what is it that we can do differently to ensure that research results are not just communicated, but also are used to influence policy. If we can do that, then we'll be getting to the next phase of then designing studies that we can design as countries to be able to identify a problem that can be addressed by good research and which could benefit policymakers. But let me say that it's been great for me to be part of this. I thank the KIX GPE team and IDRC and Yvonne and others that got me involved in this. It's a learning experience for all of us. And I think we had a very, very good start. I look forward to the next 2 workshops.
Thank you so much, Kilemi. We must say we really appreciate the discussion. Was very informative and very engaging. And I think the time is cutting us short, if I would put it like that. People just want to continue engaging, and we look forward to the next session. I've also just given us something to think about as we go, so that when we come back, that is where we'll be starting from. We want to look at how do we get solutions to these problems that all of us are pointing at, because it seems like all of us, in a way, one way or another, we are experiencing the same problems, be it in Kenya or in Nigeria or in South Africa. So for the next session, we'll start from there, and then we'll be able to look at how what solutions we have. Can we get solutions within Africa for African problems? That's how I would put it. And so as we leave, I would really appreciate, we do have a survey that has been shared on the chat. Please it will just take 5 minutes just to get your feeling about what is it that maybe you've taken away out of this session. And most importantly, what do you need us to talk about in the next session? I think that is the most important. We've already set the ground, as Clemi says, but what next? So please give us the what next. We'd really appreciate you taking the survey and just pointing us in the right direction, that we can be able to progress and hopefully get solutions to these many challenges that we have. So thank you so much, Dr. Kilemi. Thank you for being here. And we look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same day. Thank you, everyone. And,
thank you very much.
Sorry, we will share the recording as well as the presentations.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Gabriel, could you stay longer? And Zamzam, is Zamzam still here?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. And Dr. Kilemi?
Yes, I'm on.
Oh, good. Could we stay just a little bit longer and to do a bit of a postmortem?
Yes, good idea.
Okay, thank you.
All right, when does the postmortem start? And yet the workshop is not dead.
Yes, you are so engaging. People have refused to leave. But it was real. I actually felt it was real. And the discussions were really encouraging to see that people are starting to have these discussions and even to think about their own situations in their countries. And I've seen a lot of comments coming in, and people are saying this resonates with what is happening in our own country. So I think it was a good ground that you set today. And I don't know, that was my feeling. Maybe the team could also just share how was your feeling about today's session. I think we got cut off towards the end. There was not enough time, but that is because your first session was so engaging. Everybody wanted to ask a question to learn from that. So yeah, that's my observation.
Yeah, I think given the time, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I think given the time we had, I think we've done very well actually, and I'm very impressed by the participation. People are very interested. So the worry we had, Yvonne and Samsam, that sometimes people may not ask questions, to the point that Samsam was kind of forced to begin the debate in fear of the fact that there might be no questions. Apparently, it was not very well founded. So this is good. That means you guys have picked on an interesting subject, which is interesting and of value. Otherwise, there would not have been that much participation. So I think next time what we need to do is probably limit the number of presentations. I think we can focus on what is just relevant and spend a little bit more time on it, rather than try to have 2 or 3 things, and if it is necessary later on to have other workshops. But that's how I would do it. I would go about it. I would combine the next session of alternatives and relate to the presentations of today, so that those who are not able to ask questions or on further reflection of other issues to raise can base this as a basis for for future discussions. But I think we should be much more focused. I think it's been good. I think this was okay for what we intended to do. It was general. It was introduce a subject, and I think we did very well. It's my view that I think we did quite okay. I don't know how many participants came in, whether you got as many as you expected, Yvonne.
We got 34. We expected around 40, but 34 is good.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think it was a good number, and the discussions are interesting. So most likely we may get even more next time, because usually also when we share and people just get to learn about what was happening and what they missed, you find that others will come in. But 34 is a good number.
Yeah, I would say the questions were a lot and people are really engaged in them, and they were not just general questions, they were very specific questions, right? So that really tells you about the presentation itself. It obviously caused a lot of interest. So I think, yeah, we keep the same momentum for the next one. I think we should be fine.
Agreed. I'm not saying anything new to what Yvonne and Zamzam said, but I think today's session was really fantastic. And I think the number of questions and the type of questions really showed how interested people were in your presentation as well as content matter. I guess maybe as we think about the next two sessions, perhaps incorporating something like breakout rooms or some smaller sort of sessions where individuals maybe be organized by regions, if because one thing I also noticed is that I think there was participation from well over 10 of the 18 countries, which is fantastic. And so maybe that's something we can consider for future sessions. But yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Kalemi.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Daniel, I mean, Gabriel, thank you so much for, making the presentations, the PowerPoint so interesting to look at when you spend a bit of time. And, and Yvonne for also doing the draft after I give you only the word versions. That helped a great deal. So it's been a great team effort. And Samsung, many thanks. I just wonder, because I've realized also physical meetings are useful, can make a difference and can be even more motivating. Yvonne, do you have any, do you think, are you planning at any time to bring these guys together someplace in Nairobi, Addis or somewhere?
Thank you, Clemi. I think that is now should be the next discussion that we shall have on whether to bring them together, because at the moment, the physical meeting that we have planned is again on research, but it will be in Addis in October, but not particularly for this particular group, but